Here we're going to look at reference parameters, and right now all we know functions can return only one value. A reference parameter kind of allows us to return more than one value. As we'll see in this example here, it's not really returning the value, it's modifying memory locations that are outside the scope of the function. So we really don't call it returning a value, right? Just modifying data really in a different location. So let's take a look at this. We have two functions here. We have one that's called find_sum, takes two integers as inputs, and it's just going to add the two up and return the value. Right? Two integers and returns an integer. Then I added another function here called getInputs. It has one reference parameter and returns a bool. So a reference parameter is indicated by this ampersand being used here after the data type. So this indicates that this variable input, this parameter, is a reference parameter, where this x is not a reference, it's just a regular by value parameter. This one is by reference, the input one. Right? The ampersand makes the difference there. And what the ampersand is actually doing is telling it, say, whatever arguments passed to me, provide the address of it, its memory location address in the actual hardware of the computer. So it has access directly to that location so we can update that location. Right, so it gives it access, read-write access to that memory location, where this only has read access to the arguments that are coming in. Right, we'll talk about that more in a second. Let's look at the functions real quick. Right, find_sum, just adding the two inputs and then returns it. And then the getInput, again the one by reference. Oops, I gotta fix this up here. It says two more inputs, the low and the high. Alright. So it has one by reference and two by value, and they can be in any order, right? You can have one by value, then one by reference, followed by one by value again. Doesn't matter the order, right? But when you call them, it matters, obviously, but how you define them here does not matter. Returns a boolean, so it's going to indicate whether we got a valid input. That's what the high-low is. So it prompts the user to enter a value between whatever the high-low is and gets the input. If the value is between those ranges, it returns true, or else otherwise it's just going to return the false. So it kind of gets the data and validates it for us. So we have a nice useful function there, right, which we can make use of here. Right, there's no prompting we need here to get the input, but we can put in a while loop. Get input. Right. It needs three arguments. All right. One is the input parameter, which in this case would be val1. Right. You see val1 right now has no value associated, and we want a value between 0 and 10. Those could be variables if I wanted to create them too. Alright, we only want to go in the loop when that is not valid. Alright, similar to what we talked about when we talked about the Boolean functions. A couple other videos. Alright, so there we got the input. If that's invalid, we want to call getInput again. Alright, and this is not going to work. This is not great because there's really nothing that needs to go inside the loop. So it's not the greatest way of doing this. So let's clean this up a little. Alright, Boolean result. Alright, and what we're going to do is I'm going to take this, take it out of there, put it there. Alright, so now this result has a Boolean result of whether the input was valid or not, and then we can just simply do that within the loop. Now you can put that inside the condition of the loop and have nothing in the curly brackets. Not the greatest looking code. Right? But this will sit here constantly asking for a value between 0 and 10 until the user provides a valid input. Alright, and we'll do the same thing for the second input. Alright, so again, we're using one function, multiple purposes, but this time we're going to tell it has to be a value between 10 and just say 20. Alright, 10 and 20. Alright, and this is going to go into value 2. So the same function, getting two different arguments, and it's going to return those values that we need. Alright, and then once we have that, we're going to call the find sum, and we're going to pass it value 1 and value 2, and we'll just output the number. Alright, so when we call get input, value 1 obviously is associated with the input, which is by reference here. Right, so it's getting the address of value 1 in memory when it's allocated, right, wherever it's allocated to, and assigning it the address to this one. So this is looking at the physical same location that value 1 is stored in memory. So this does not get its own location or chunk of memory. It just gets this point to the same location in memory that value 1 is at. Same thing happens when we call it then with value 2. It then now looks at the same memory location as value 2. That allows it to modify the values that these variables have at its memory location. Alright, so let's just quickly run through it once and see it actually running without putting any invalid inputs. We'll put some valid inputs in here. Alright, nice and simple, 5. And you see it's prompting us for the correct value, so we'll put 15. That should give us a sum of 20. Alright, as you see right there. Alright, got the proper prompts in terms of the range, because that's what I passed in, entered the values, and we got a 20. Alright, so let's see it now running with invalid inputs. Alright, so 99 there. Alright, still prompting me. 55, still prompting me. We'll put a 4 in this time. And moved on to the second input. Put 100 there. Alright, still invalid. We'll put a 5 there. Still invalid. Alright, and let's put in 17, which is valid, and we get to finally get the result of 21, which is the 17 plus the 4. Alright, so it stayed in that loop, constantly prompting for an input. Alright, and the values we inputted were here. Alright, so every time we called this, and the first time with value 1, this is actually modifying the value of value 1. So we're kind of returning a value. Right, modifying data back in the call area wherever the function got called from, and then we're also providing information. Was it a valid input? Right? So it's one of the possible ways of combining reference variables and the return values to give you multiple information, right, back. Right? And then the other two are just inputs for the output, right, to display, and then for checking the proper ranges. So this function does quite a bit. Gets some inputs, does the validation. Right, it's using reference variables, returning a bool value, right, and being used. Right. We could modify find sum. Instead of returning a value, have it a third parameter in which we pass it the sum. Right. The third parameter would have to be by reference, and then we do not have to do down here the sum equals find sum. We can have the sum in here as a third argument, and now that variable would have the same result as we've been getting. So you can have functions with no return values and do everything through parameters. Not the greatest again, but nothing wrong with that. Alright, you got the ability to use the return statement, so you should probably be using it. Alright.